Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Inside segment. I'm Harold Fisher. 9 months into the Trump administration, the budget act is still swinging. New data shows Black women, once considered the backbone of the civil service, are among the hardest hit. They face job losses in the hundreds of thousands. The ripple effects are serious: household budgets, retirement, family stability, even generational wealth, all at risk. How do families caught in the crosshairs stay afloat and bounce back? We are talking to two financial experts with analysis and strategies. LaShawn Holland is a wealth coach and author of Born to Multiple, and Muriel Garr, financial expert and host of Beyond the Bling. Ladies, thank you so much for joining the conversation. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank
Sure
you.
thing. Let me first start with some really important fast facts that quite honestly are difficult to hear. When we talk about job losses and gains between February of this year and July, Black women have lost 319,000 jobs across the public and private sectors. White women have gained 142,000, Hispanic women 175,000. White men saw the largest increase, landing 365,000 jobs between February and July. Now, prior to those federal job cuts, Black women accounted for 12% of the workforce. What do you believe, Muriel, these federal job cuts actually look like? And why are Black women affected so disproportionately?
Let me give you a political correct response.
Well, okay. But let me say, I don't know whether or not we need a politically correct response. Somebody who is a Black woman who has been employed for 20, 30 years and now isn't, may not want a politically correct response.
I mean, we don't want folks to say we're subscribing to a conspiracy theory, but it does appear that Black women have a target on their back, and they have been unfairly attacked as we're looking to balance the federal budget. And I say that because any good business owner knows that when expenses outweigh revenue, you've got to do a right sizing. Mm-hmm. So we know we have, every September we're going up how we're going to budget how we're going to balance the budget. And so our expenses were definitely outweighing the revenue. But we also know that when you're doing a right sizing effort, you don't just come in with a knife that isn't sharp. You come in with a sharp knife, but the reason why that knife is sharp is because you've researched who does what well, and then the right sizing is based on those positions that you can eliminate. It should be done blind. It shouldn't be done based on race. It shouldn't be done based on gender. And so the fact that the numbers that you just provided, that Black women are 3 times more likely to be laid off. So you had 300,000 plus Black women who lost jobs, but then so that's a negative, but then you had an increase in other ethnic groups by 175 plus. So either or the other part could be that there were so many Black women doing these jobs and so many Black women doing them poorly that it justified what occurred. Now we know that is definitely not true. They were singled. It appears, and it's almost obvious, they were singled out, and there's another agenda at play. And you talked about that also in your opening comments. When you start taking people's jobs and you start impacting the revenue that goes into their households and their ability to actually have ownership. And ownership then helps to amplify a voice. But that's just some of my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. And LaShawn, I think on the other side of this, we've already talked about how many have lost jobs, but this is September, and with all of the reporting and the discussion around the fact that by September, those people who are taking the payouts or the buyouts or whatever you want to call it, the early retirement, what have you, who prior to were not planning on doing any of that. Well, now we are in September, and we
Right.
are going to really begin to see the effects. Maybe we could see it by January of 2026. We may see the effects by November 1st, because so many people live paycheck to paycheck without any kind of cushion. So
Right.
what steps should they take right now if they are in that number?
Yeah. One of the things that I want to say earlier, I heard Miriam say doesn't want to say that it's a conspiracy theorist. I don't think it's
Mhm.
conspiracy. I think it's facts. I mean, we see the numbers. Numbers don't lie. People do. This was very strategic, right? They were methodical in what they were doing. And so they absolutely understand that. I think it is a time now. One of the things that I'm sharing with people now when I'm on stage and I'm talking to them, you got to know where you are. Any good navigation system, before you can put in where you're going, they need to know what's your location now. And so you got to figure out, what do you have in your hand now? And so a lot of times women, we don't want to confront what we're confused about, but we need clarity in this season about your financial location, right? Where are you? What do you have available to you right now? And so that's important for us to start looking at what gifts do we have right in our hands currently that we can use to start making money. Like, it doesn't take a long time, but you do have to have a plan. And if there are no jobs for you out here, I talk to people all the time. I'm putting out 100 resumes a day. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. If there are no jobs, then you create one. All right. We can't sit around and wait for someone to rescue. This administration is not coming to rescue us. And so we have to pull together. Community is important in this time, and navigation, like, where are you, knowing where you are, what you have access to right now. This isn't your forever, but right now you got to get in the driver's seat. And so it's important that we take those considerations, especially knowing where's your financial navigation. Where am I right now? What do I have that I can use? What do I need to get rid of? And then what can I start that will bring revenue in?
But not everyone is necessarily cut out to be an entrepreneur.
No, and I'm not saying, I said earlier that it's not your forever, but it is your right now. And I'm not saying
Okay.
that you have to be an entrepreneur. I just had a client that I walked through with being able to be a lender. If you have money put away in a 401k or IUL or Roth IRA, if you want to pull something out, she did. She loaned it to another Black woman who was doing a launch. And 45 days later, she made money with interest. But not everybody has money put away. You said, when we looked at statistics, the statistics are most don't even have $1,000 put away in the case of an emergency. Right. And so it may not be your forever, but right now you need food on the table. You have to be able to have a roof over your head. So I'm not saying be the next, Bill Gates. What I am saying is, look at where you are right now. What can you do right now that you can put money on the table?
Muriel, let me ask you this, because you and I have had these conversations for
Mhm.
a really, really long time. And I think this is one of the things that is important regarding a mindset. Let us say, for example, that you haven't lost your job, okay, and that you are perhaps in a good financial position. And let's say you don't have any major debt, but you have always said, and others obviously, that you should have a good 6 months worth of income put aside in the event of a rainy day. But for a lot of people, that may seem almost impossible to do. How long can someone expect to take to put away 6 months worth of income cushion? If you make $100,000 a year and you don't, if you're a single, since we're talking about Black women, let's say you're a single Black woman and that you don't have a working spouse, you could be single, widow, whatever. How long would it take to do that?
Well, that's all relevant. That depends on what your lifestyle is.
Okay.
Because you're putting that out there as if everyone is living within their means and they're using 30 to 42% of their income to cover their expenses.
Right.
And that's not even real. We don't even use that formula anymore when trying to approve people for a home. They're getting approved for a home using 50% plus.
Yes.
And so if you don't have that much negligible cash that you can set aside, it's going to take a minute for you to actually set aside 6 months worth of living expenses. That's why we also say, back to what LaShawn says in a different way, is that you should always have a side hustle and use that money for the side hustle to put aside to actually fund your emergency fund. But right now, even those individuals, Harold, that you reference that I often talk to, that are previous to January 2025 were well heeled and securing their jobs. They got 6 months of revenue set aside. There's something to be said to what happens to an individual psychologically when you are messing with their head, and they were cool in 2024, but they never know when they walk into that office if something's going to shift in wherever they're employed, and they may lose their job today. The psychological aspect of what's going on and how it is impacting particularly Black women is something that we cannot just brush under the carpet. It's not just about the money right now. It's also about how you are messing with our head to think that we could lose everything we've worked for. Those 312,000 women, that Black women particularly, that lost their job, did not just get a job because they were Black. They got a job because they were good, and they kept a job because they were blank good at what they did. Then they were eliminated, and then other women who may or may not be just as good as, probably weren't, because the reality of it is we got to be 3 times better in order to even get considered. Then you got to think about what's been happening and how we see ourselves and our ability to pick ourselves up. Like LaShawn said, you're putting out 100 resumes and you're not even getting a nibble. That messes with your head. And if your head isn't right, then your ability to show up, whether it's for an interview, whether it's to pivot, is going to be challenged.
Absolutely.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, go ahead, LaShawn.
No, she's absolutely right. Those are those limiting beliefs. And to be honest, the women that I'm getting calls from aren't about money. It is about mindset and how to navigate this season, because so much is happening. You're dealing with healing money wounds in this season so you can move forward, feeling like your value, your voice. You're right. 100 resumes a day and nobody's calling me back. It starts to mess with how you perceive your value is that you're offering to the world. And so I think somatic practices in this time is our best friend, because we got a lot that we're dealing with.
When you say somatic practices, what do you mean?
Getting out of nature, right? Getting out of nature, doing breath work. I host a group now of women, 450 women, and in the morning we meet to go do breath work. Take a yoga class or do hot yoga or, do Tai Chi or, Qigong, something to move the negative energy around in your body.
Okay, so like a whole, maybe like a holistic approach to your own mental health and mindset, so that you can be ready to take the ball when it is passed to you. Maybe it's that 101st resume that you send out.
Absolutely.
Maybe the first one that you sent out that they finally picked up, and that makes a whole lot of sense. Hold on, because I want to take an even deeper dive into all of these ideas and issues, but I need to take a break. Don't forget, you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is coming up next on WHUR-FM. This conversation continues on Sirius XM Channel 141 and 96.3 HD2 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM Channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about the impact of the federal government job cuts. How do families caught in the crosshair stay afloat and bounce back? My guests are Muriel Garr, financial expert and host of Beyond the Bling, also LaShawn Holland, wealth coach and author of Born to Multiple. I want to go back to something that is really important, and both of you have families, but I want to start with you, LaShawn, in this particular case, because your children are grown. Mm-hmm. But even as your success, LaShawn, has transitioned and evolved when your children were young, what kind of conversations did you have with them? And when Black women are having evolution in their careers and their financial system situations evolving in the opposite direction with young children, how should they talk to them when, baby, there are no more Jordans and PS5s or whatever it is? You're gonna have to learn how to enjoy yourself by picking up a book.
Right. I think one of the things that we were very transparent with our kids when they were younger. And so when at that time we were just starting a business and we couldn't always go out and get them the toys that they wanted. And so I was very honest. I never said no. I just said, just not right now. And I made note of the things that they were asking for because I wanted to honor my word to my kids. But I used to wake them up every Saturday morning. They would come to my office and they would get financial lessons. And I'm talking elementary school. Okay. I started my kids investing when they were in elementary school, but I wanted them to grow up, learning how money, the game of money and the game of wealth, because they're totally two different games. But I was very honest and transparent, but I was future casting with them also, with their dreams. Like, we may not can do it today, but we can tomorrow. And then what does that look like? But I was very honest with them, and my kids started, this, Harold, they started their own businesses. By the time they were 11 and 12 years old, they were making six figures. And so, everybody in my house had to add their hand to the plow. And so I wanted them to learn how to make money independent of a job for situations just like we're in today. And so be very transparent. And I also didn't make excuses of why they couldn't get certain things. I was just very honest. I wasn't saying we were broke, because we were never in that situation, but hey, we're working on something. And so I would have them sit down and write out a vision for their future too. Right. And so it's important, even with kids, to be transparent. I didn't make excuse of why I couldn't get something done. I carried my kids with us. When we were looking at real estate investing properties, they were in the car. When we were talking to our real estate investing attorney, they were also in the office sitting there quietly so they can learn also. And so I didn't make excuses of where we were, but we were very transparent and we shared vision with them. And even though, like you said, today they're grown, we still get together in the beginning of the year as a family and collectively do our vision casting, collectively dreaming, and then we go to work on the dreams. We don't get caught on the dreaming. We get caught up on the execution part. Right. Mm-hmm. And so, again, it's important. Be transparent with your kids, be honest with your kids, and then teach your kids what's possible by showing them what's possible.
Mm-hmm. Muriel, same thing. What advice do you have for families? I mean, certainly we are talking about black women in this context, but more broadly, Black families that have been impacted by this dramatic shift in employment, because these things also impact the private industry when there's been the attack on DEI, Black workers in the private industry.
Well, I wish I had LaShawn as a role model when I was raising my two children.
I wish I had me as a role model. You know,
my story is totally different. And so when you ask me that question, Harold, I would say the first thing I would say, particularly to Black women, and specifically to those that are single raising children, is to take the S off your chest. It's the first thing I would say, because I will say, you know, of the many errors that I made in raising my two children, a primary one was wearing the S on my chest and feeling like I had to do everything possible for them to have everything that they wanted, and it was no such thing as sacrifice. And that was the dumbest thing that's one of the dumbest things I did.
Where did that come from?
I'm from a different generation now. Today's generation, getting divorced happens every day. Having children out of wedlock happens every day. The generation that I came from, that was like a death sentence. Mm-hmm. You know, the family was this perfect family that you see presented, and that was not the environment in which my children were raised. And so I had to make sure in my head there was this story that was being played, that there was a certain persona that I had to present. And mm-hmm. although my marriage didn't work, that did not mean that my children would have to suffer and understand what it takes to actually have a family and to raise children. That just meant that I made a choice, and as a result of me making that choice, I needed to work even harder.
I see. Okay.
And so for my children, what they learned was something totally different, until I got to a point of an awakening and realized that the narrative that was replaying in my head was crazy and didn't make any sense. So bringing it back to full circle, for women now who are raising children who have lost their job, take the S off your chest. You need to sit down and have a real conversation with your children about, you know what, this is what's going on. I never sat down and talked to you about what it looks like to manage this household, but now I want us to sit down and have a household monopoly session. This is what it takes to manage this household. And this is what mom is not able to do because of the revenue that is not coming in. So now I need all of us to think about what skills and talents do we bring to the table based on what it is we are looking for in our life immediately and down the road. If your children are getting ready to go to college, you didn't make some pre-plans beforehand, then you need to have that conversation. Having an honest, transparent conversation with your children helps to bring them to a point that when they leave home, they're financially responsible adults. It's also something very refreshing when you share with your children what's going on in the journey. They look at you differently. They have more passion and compassion for you.
Give me an example of that.
When you share with your children that stupid example, but a real one. My children had Sunday outings every Sunday because it was an opportunity to expose them to white tablecloth dining and the culture that goes along with it.
Okay.
And so as a result, they were exposed to the menus and the menu selections there. Mm-hmm. So my father said to me one day, he said, you know, your son has this thing where he clearly knows how to order from the menu, and he orders the most expensive thing on the menu. Mm-hmm. You need to expose your children to chicken because you are on a chicken budget. Exposing them to that helped them to realize that, yeah, filet mignon, but you know what? Mama don't have filet mignon money.
Mm-hmm.
Mom's budget is working off a chicken until you get to a point where. And so now my son, when it comes to money and finance, we had a conversation, I think middle of last year. He says, Mom, I do not like bills. I pay everything off in cash. And when it comes to what he spends on food, although he has a very eclectic taste, he is very sensitive to how he spends his money in that space. Because what he saw was the struggle. He also saw the denial from the parent. He saw the impact on him as a child growing up. And he realized that it all don't work that way, that it needs to be done differently. Yeah. Does that make sense?
It does, which leads me to this question for LaShawn, because you really kind of touched on a really important point, Muriel, in this bigger space. And I'm not talking about now Black women of a certain age. I'm talking about Black women who are under 40. Okay. Black women who perhaps are in their 30s or maybe even in their late 20s. They have a degree or two and they are beginning to make that climb, but may be oblivious to or ignoring the potential dangers that we are talking about in this conversation. My question, LaShawn, is for that group of Black women, what is the financial risk of wealth culture that we often see on social media? And before you answer, I'll give you an example. When I was in my 20s, I got out of school and I worked. So did all of my friends, the young Black men who I am still friends with today. We did not take vacations. We were not going to Aruba and the Bahamas and Jamaica and Cabo. We
Tulum.
we were completely oblivious to any. Our luxury was every 2 weeks we would go to Adams Morgan, to the Ethiopian restaurant, and because it was every 2 weeks on payday.
Right.
And that's what we would do. But now I think that there is the explosion of wealth culture that is really dangerous financially for a lot of young Black people, particularly Black professional women.
Absolutely. Listen, I have a 25-year-old daughter, as you know, that's at home. And I often have conversations with a lot of her friends that come over. And this generation just thinks very, very differently than my generation. I'm Gen X. And even baby boomers, they think differently. And the conversation that I have is, just because, Southwest is having a sale doesn't mean that you need to be on the plane going to Southwest in Tulum so you can shoot Instagram videos when you have student loans to pay for. And so I think when you're not transparent with your kids growing up and you don't have crucial conversations around money, this is what happens. And we have a generation that we did not want them to struggle growing up like we did. I'm guilty of this too. We didn't want them to grow up. The difference is I was talking a lot. Even with my maid, I didn't allow her to clean up their room. Learn how to clean up your own room. She's for me now in this stage of my life. But when I was your age, these are the things that I had to do. And yes, my kids make fun. They don't like hearing the stories of me working 3 jobs to put myself through college. They're like, oh my God, Mom, you're sounding like Rochelle on Everybody Hates Chris. My man has 3 jobs. Whatever, it was my reality. And you only get to live the life that you live because the life that I lived. And so I think it's important to start having conversations with them early. It's not to say, we had this conversation with my son. He played football for Penn State. He thought because I wasn't paying tuition that I can go buy him a 7 Series convertible BMW. And I took a Honda Accord up there to him. This is what your pocket can afford. I am not buying you that. And I know a lot of their friends, they went to a school where the kids drove up with Ferraris and stuff. That wasn't my story. And I also didn't feel bad about it. And I was just honest with them. You can go to Tulum, you can go wherever you want to go in the world, but you don't have to do it right now. And so helping them plan on how to put that into your life. If you're not putting money away, number one, in a savings, you don't need to be in Tulum or any with Cancun or nowhere else. King's Dominion, that should be your travel. And so just really being honest and showing them how to work their numbers all the way out. I cannot tell you how many Gen Zs that I have sat down with. And the number one thing that we are working on is their mindset, right? Because they have this sense of entitlement. I don't want to live a life like my parents. They never traveled. They never did this, but you can't afford to buy a house. Your parents had a home. They can afford to pay for their car insurance. You, my dear, just use your car insurance money flying down, to Mexico somewhere. And so it's being honest and showing them the numbers. Like, we're not pretending. This younger generation, they're Ubering everywhere. Well, you spent $500 a month in an Uber. You could have bought a car by then. Like, it's just really, hey, this is an unprofitable habit for you. And then constantly talking and teaching. These aren't my children that I'm talking to, but I'm still teaching. I feel like Maya Angelou said, when you learn, you teach. And we have a responsibility to keep having open conversations, because you only know what you only know, right? And if their parents didn't have, crucial money conversations with them around the dinner table, somebody needs to, because this world is unforgiving for our kids.
Yeah. I want to, in these last 10 minutes or so, talk about, first of all, the ripple effects of these cuts on the Black community. And then I want to go into solutions and resources. And certainly with your career in banking, Muriel, this has to be a particularly frightening scenario, because we saw this after the mortgage crisis of overgrown yards and abandoned homes and the like. Is it far-reaching to think that we could see the same thing?
The foreclosure numbers are out. They're just not being broadcast on the 5 o'clock or the 6 o'clock news. Foreclosures are up. Delinquencies are up as it pertains to individuals' ability to not only pay their mortgage, but also on their credit card debt. Credit card debt is high. The savings that people accumulated during COVID is low, particularly for those in Black and brown communities. But in every situation, there's going to be winners and losers. And so I get excited about what's happening now economically. And hear me out. Because for those who are well-heeled, this is an opportunity. And that opportunity is to purchase foreclosed homes and short sale homes, ensure that our communities remain stabilized, and then they can use that opportunity to support other Black and brown families who may not be financially healed.
When you say support,
I see that look on your face, because you're like, what in that blank?
No. The look that you saw was the last part, because there, in all things that you speak and have spoken about in the years since we've had these conversations, everything has been strategic. And so you're not talking in helping other Black and brown families about giving, little, Shanae and Byron, the kids, $20 because mama or dad can't do that. You're talking about something much more broad when you're talking about helping other Black and brown families. So
I'm talking about something much bigger.
You're right. So what do you mean?
We're talking about what we don't want to see is we don't want to see neighborhoods with grass, and that's not what we want to see. So this whole thing with eliminating positions, particularly for Black and brown people, was strategic. When you eliminate revenue, you impact the ability for individuals to take care of their financial obligations, their primary financial obligation. And generally speaking, the most profitable asset on an individual's balance sheet is their real estate. And so if individuals cannot maintain their real estate and lose their home, they also lose the equity that came with that home. If we see, and we're seeing this as is happening, if we have, LaShawn mentioned at the top of the show about, you said entrepreneurship, and she said, well, it was an individual that actually had assets on their balance sheet and an investment in an investment vehicle. They were able to pull those assets and loan it to an entrepreneur who was bootstrapping or needed that money for their business. Of course, they charged interest on it and they made money off of it. Okay. We've got to have that same mindset as it pertains to what's happening on the real estate market. But what's key to that is we've got to put our pride aside and be willing to have conversations in our inner circle about, this is what's going on. I'm getting ready to lose my house. And then we have to have this thing called trust to help each other to ensure that we protect the asset. By doing that, we're also protecting the equity. We're also protecting the transfer of wealth, because we have not allowed them to not only take our job, but also steal the wealth that we worked hard to build over a period of time. Mm-hmm. Now, that may sound crazy, and people might say, where's she coming from? How's she talking about that? But think about the neighborhoods that were allowed to be devalued so that people that don't look like us could come in and purchase the real estate at a cheap, and then 5 years later bring in a Starbucks as that real estate goes up 200 and 300%. That's strategic. It's not that they just roll the dice. They know what they are doing. So instead of us just being a victim, because there's some victimization to this, we have to understand the game. This is chess, not checkers. And so we've got to be able to say, okay, you know what? That's what's happening. We see that disproportionately African Americans are losing, or their houses are in foreclosure, their credit is high. So how can we put a network around them, a funding pool around them? This is where churches and other organizations come into play to ensure that we protect the asset. Mm-hmm. But that requires being transparent. It requires knowing the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is not, I like what LaShawn said about flying on Southwest. I say it's not hair, nails, what you're wearing, and the Instagram picture. It's the bigger picture.
Yeah. LaShawn, your thoughts about solutions for, we know that this is a tragic play, but what is, you as one of the executive producers of this tragic play, can you help Black women write an ending that is not a tragedy? What do you suggest to them?
Well, one of the things that I love, Muriel said too, that this is a season of opportunity. One is really learning again how to play the money game. When you look at before this, when I say before, I mean the last, 60 days started to happen earlier and at the end of last year, you started seeing billionaires, Warren Buffett, Carlos Slim Helu, you started seeing them liquidate a lot of their assets because they knew what was gonna happen. So they could come up because they know America's going on sale. Real estate is going on sale. They understand that. Companies are going on sale. Washington, D.C., I heard a statistic last week that said over 300 businesses have closed down in Washington, D.C. now because of the restaurants, the issues that's going going on there now. And so this is opportunity for the people that's positioned correctly to go in. Now, if you haven't worked on your positioning and you don't have any help, now is the time to be able to learn. Like she said, they're playing chess, not checkers. What are the rules to the game? Right. And so you got to learn the rules so you know how to play well. And there are resources out here. I know Lynn Richardson, who is another financial expert, is working with a group now to help the Black women that have lost their jobs in government. Pearl, to your point, not everybody is an entrepreneur, but everybody needs to be able to make some money. So they're working with them, teaching them about having healthier financial habits that you have, growing your own food, being able to produce money on your own in the market. And so it's important that we figure out, okay, what are the asset classes? What are the rules for me to be able to play that game? And then stop waiting. Stop procrastinating. You don't have time, is not on your side. Learn how to play this game very well.
Real quick, can you share one or two resources where people can at least take those first steps for those concerned?
Yeah, those, if anyone that hears this want more information about the organization that she is building and working with Black women, they can reach out to me at LaShawnholland.com, or you can just Google my name. I come up, everywhere, and reach out, and I can help you make the connection between what Lynn is doing, and, the women who may need it. Or if you want to learn about using your gifts, what's in your hand? One of the things that I've been crying out for years, God told Noah to build the ark before the rain. Right. And so you can't wait, just sit around and wait. Nobody's coming to rescue you. And so figure out, what are your gifts? The things that I started making money with years ago, I'm not doing today. My kids started out with a shaved ice business. They're not doing that today. They're doing very well for themselves. So what you may start today may not be your tomorrow. Right. I don't have vending machines anymore, but it's what I did with the $3,000 bonus that I got 30 years ago, was to be able to buy vending machines to put them in a government office building. And that's how we got our start. The money from the vending machines, we were able to put into real estate. From real estate, we were able to buy a brokerage firm. And so the rest is history. Look at where you are, your navigation, and what you have available that you can use to make money. If people are selling air to the people in China, and the people in China are buying air, don't tell me you cannot sell something, right? We're talking air. They charge $130 for a jar of air.
I love it when she says that. And I would say, and LaShawn, I would be interested.
Real quick, Muriel, I've got 40 seconds. Go ahead, real quick.
So if you've got something in your house that you're not using, then it should be a way for you to make money off of it. A friend of mine has multiple cars, and he leases out his cars just like Enterprise would do, because guess what? He can't drive but one at a time.
Right.
That's true. Yeah. I think that's a great way to end this conversation. Thank you all so very, very much. I'm sure that someone will get something out of this conversation, and we are going to continue to talk about it. That is the Daily Drum for Tuesday, September 2nd. I'm Harold Fisher.